In the tense years of the Cold War of the 1960s, information was power. The United States and its allies were locked in a silent battle with the Soviet Union. Both sides built weapons designed to outfly, outgun, and outmaneuver the other. But there was one aircraft in particular that worried Western intelligence more than any other: the MiG-21, fast, agile, deadly. By the early 1960s, it had become the backbone of the Soviet air forces and of Soviet allies across the Middle East. Israel's enemies were receiving them in large numbers. Most problematically, Israel had never actually studied one up close. No Western country had. The aircraft was a mystery. How fast could it climb? How strong was its radar? What were its weaknesses? Without answers, Israeli pilots could be flying straight into danger. So Israel decided to do something almost impossible. They would steal one. So the job fell to one intelligence agency, Israel's elite spy organization, the Mossad. And what followed would become one of the boldest intelligence operations of the Cold War, a mission later known as Operation Diamond. The 1960s were a dangerous time. The Cold War divided the world into two powerful camps. On one side stood the United States and its allies. On the other side stood the Soviet Union. Both sides competed not just in politics, but in technology and military power. Nowhere was that competition more intense than in the skies. Fighter jets were evolving rapidly. Every new aircraft promised greater speed, better weapons, and more advanced radar. But one aircraft stood out among the rest: the MiG-21. When it first appeared in the late 1950s, it shocked Western observers. It was small and lightweight, but incredibly fast. The aircraft could exceed Mach 2. That meant it could travel more than twice the speed of sound. Its sharp delta wings made it highly maneuverable, and it carried powerful air-to-air missiles designed to destroy enemy aircraft. For the Soviet Union, the MiG-21 became a symbol of military strength. It was exported across the world, especially to countries friendly with Moscow. Many of those countries were located in the Middle East, and that was where Israel began to worry. During the early 1960s, several Arab nations began receiving large numbers of MiG-21 fighter jets. Countries like Egypt, Syria, and Iraq added the aircraft to their air forces. For Israel, this posed a serious problem. The Israeli Air Force was highly skilled. Its pilots were among the best trained in the region, but they had never faced a MiG-21 in combat, and they had never studied one up close. That meant Israeli pilots were preparing for war against an aircraft they barely understood. How fast could it accelerate? How tight could it turn? What were its radar capabilities? Most importantly, where were its weaknesses? Without that knowledge, Israeli pilots could be flying blind in the next war. And war seemed increasingly likely, so Israel's military leaders made a bold decision. They needed a MiG-21, not a damaged one, not a wreckage recovered after a crash, a fully functioning aircraft. But getting one would not be easy. Capturing a Soviet fighter jet during combat was unlikely. The aircraft would probably be destroyed in battle. Even if it crashed, the wreckage might be too damaged to study. Buying one secretly was impossible. The Soviet Union carefully controlled every aircraft it exported. That left only one option: convince a pilot to defect, someone who could fly the aircraft directly into Israeli territory. It was a risky plan. If the pilot was discovered, he would almost certainly be executed. And if the operation failed, it could trigger a major international crisis. Still, the mission moved forward. The job was given to the Mossad. Finding a MiG-21 was one thing. Finding the right pilot to steal one was another challenge entirely. Inside the headquarters of the Mossad, intelligence officers understood that the success of the mission depended on a single person: a fighter pilot, someone trained to fly the MiG-21, someone who had regular access to the aircraft, and most importantly, someone who could be convinced to betray his country. That combination was incredibly rare. Fighter pilots were among the most trusted individuals in any military. They were carefully vetted, highly trained, and closely monitored. Many were deeply loyal to their governments. and those who flew Soviet aircraft often operated under strict supervision. Still, Mossad began searching, quietly, patiently, across the Middle East. The first targets were pilots in Egypt. At the time, Egypt had become one of the largest operators of Soviet fighter jets outside the Soviet Union. Under the leadership of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt had built a powerful air force equipped with modern Soviet aircraft. Israeli intelligence hoped that somewhere inside that air force there might be a pilot willing to defect. Mossad agents began gathering information. With Mossad agent John Thomas on the ground, finding a pilot was going to be easy. He studied personal histories, family backgrounds, financial situations, political beliefs. The goal was simple: identify someone vulnerable, someone who might consider leaving. Eventually, they found a candidate, Adib Hanna, a pilot believed to be unhappy with his career in the Egyptian military. Through intermediaries, Mossad attempted to make contact, carefully, indirectly, but the plan quickly collapsed. The pilot refused the offer. He informed the authorities about Thomas's interest in the MiG. Thomas, his father, and 3 other people were arrested and charged with espionage. Thomas and 2 others were hanged in December 1962. The other 3 members of the group received long prison sentences. For Mossad, the message was clear: this mission was extremely dangerous. The second attempt also failed. Mossad agents ended up assaulting 2 Iraqi pilots who refused to cooperate with them, in order to keep them quiet for some time. The mission continued, but it was clear that recruiting a MiG pilot would be far more difficult than expected. The next attempt took place in Syria. Syria also operated Soviet aircraft and maintained a large air force. Again, Mossad searched for a pilot who might be willing to defect. They identified another potential candidate. This time, the approach seemed more promising. The pilot reportedly had financial difficulties. He was also frustrated with conditions inside the Syrian military. Agents believed those factors might make him receptive. But when the proposal was finally delivered, the pilot reacted with shock. He rejected the idea immediately. The risk was simply too great. Defection meant abandoning his country, his career, and possibly his family. Once again, Mossad withdrew before the situation could escalate. Another lead had failed. Every failed attempt risked exposing the entire operation, and the MiG-21 remained out of reach. Eventually, Mossad decided to try a more aggressive strategy. Instead of quietly approaching individual pilots, they would make a dramatic offer. Israeli intelligence spread word through secret channels that any pilot who delivered a MiG-21 to Israel would receive an enormous reward: $1 million. At the time, that was an extraordinary amount of money. The message quietly circulated across the region, among pilots in Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. The offer eventually reached a pilot in Iraq, a captain in the Iraqi Air Force, a man named Munir Redfar. He had access to the aircraft they desperately wanted. He flew the MiG-21 regularly, and unlike the others they had approached before, he had reasons to consider the offer, reasons strong enough to change the course of Cold War intelligence history. The man who could change everything. Captain Munir Redfar was a skilled fighter pilot. He flew the MiG-21 regularly, which made him extremely valuable. But Redfar's story was complicated. He belonged to the Assyrian people, a Christian minority in Iraq. Within the Iraqi military, minorities often faced discrimination. Redfar believed his career opportunities were limited. Despite his skill as a pilot, promotions seemed out of reach. He also worried about the future of his family. Iraq in the 1960s was politically unstable. Coups and internal struggles were common. For Mossad, these frustrations created an opportunity. Agents began carefully approaching him through intermediaries. The meetings were quiet, gradual, and extremely cautious. At first, the discussions focused on small things: travel opportunities, business contacts. Then eventually, the real offer appeared. Would he consider flying his MiG-21 out of Iraq? The proposal was simple: fly the aircraft to Israel, deliver it intact. In return, he would receive a large sum of money. More importantly, his family would be relocated safely outside Iraq. It was an extraordinary offer, but the risks were enormous. If Iraqi authorities discovered the plot, Redfar would likely be executed for treason. Even if he succeeded, he could never return home. For weeks he hesitated. Then he made his decision. He would do it. The mission became known as Operation Diamond. The planning was meticulous. Israeli intelligence needed to ensure that everything happened perfectly. First, Redfar's family had to be evacuated. Mossad secretly moved them out of Iraq. Once they were safe, the operation could continue. Next came the flight plan. Redfar would take off during a routine training mission. He would follow his normal route for a short time. Then he would suddenly change direction. Instead of returning to base, he would fly west, across Jordan, and into Israel. Israeli radar operators would be watching carefully. Once the aircraft was detected, Israeli fighters would escort him to safety. But there were still many dangers. The aircraft had limited fuel. If Redfar miscalculated the distance, he could crash before reaching Israel. Even worse, Iraqi radar operators might realize what was happening. If they did, they could scramble fighters to intercept him, or even order him shot down. On the morning of August 16, 1966, Captain Munir Redfar walked toward his aircraft. The sleek MiG-21 sat waiting on the runway. Ground crews prepared the jet as usual. No one suspected what was about to happen. Redfar climbed into the cockpit. The engine roared to life. Moments later, the jet raced down the runway. Within seconds, it lifted into the sky. At first, everything looked normal. He followed the planned training route. Controllers at the base monitored his flight, but then, after reaching the right point, Redfar changed course. Instead of turning back toward Iraq, he turned west, straight toward Israel. As the MiG-21 sped across the desert, every minute mattered. The aircraft's fuel supply was limited. If Redfar flew too fast, he could run out before reaching Israel. If he flew too slow, Iraqi radar operators might notice the unusual route. Meanwhile, Israeli radar stations scanned the skies. Eventually, they detected something unexpected: an unidentified aircraft approaching from the east. Commanders immediately scrambled fighters. 2 Dassault Mirage 3 interceptors took off. The Mirages quickly closed the distance. As they approached the mysterious aircraft, the pilots could hardly believe what they were seeing. A MiG-21. Flying directly toward Israeli airspace, the Israeli pilots carefully approached the jet. Inside the cockpit, they saw the pilot. It was Munir Redfar. He signaled that everything was going according to plan. The Mirages formed a protective escort around the aircraft. Together they flew toward Hatzor Air Base. On the ground, Israeli commanders waited nervously. If Iraqi aircraft appeared, the situation could quickly turn into combat. But none came. Minutes later, Redfar lowered the landing gear. The jet touched down smoothly. For the first time in history, Israel had captured a fully operational MiG-21. Israeli engineers immediately began examining the aircraft. They studied its radar systems, its engine performance, its maneuverability. The results were invaluable, but the story didn't end there. Soon, the United States requested access to the jet. American pilots were eager to test the aircraft themselves. Eventually, the MiG was secretly flown to the famous testing facility known as Area 51. There, American pilots flew the aircraft against US fighters. They wanted to understand exactly how the MiG-21 performed in combat. The tests revealed critical insights. The aircraft was extremely fast and agile, but it also had weaknesses. Its visibility from the cockpit was limited. Its radar was not as advanced as Western systems, and its fuel capacity was relatively small. This information would prove vital for Western pilots. Just 1 year later, tensions in the Middle East exploded. In June 1967, Israel fought a short but decisive conflict known as the Six-Day War. During the war, Israeli pilots faced enemy aircraft that included the MiG-21. But this time, the aircraft was no longer a mystery. Israeli pilots knew exactly how it behaved in the air. They knew its strengths and its weaknesses. That knowledge gave them a crucial advantage in combat. After the operation, Munir Redfar began a new life. He received financial compensation for the mission. His family lived safely outside Iraq, but he could never return home. To Iraq, he was a traitor. To Israeli intelligence, He was the man who delivered one of the most valuable intelligence prizes of the Cold War. Today, Operation Diamond is considered one of the most successful espionage missions in modern history. It showed how intelligence agencies sometimes achieve victory without firing a single shot. All it took was careful planning, patient recruitment, and one courageous pilot willing to risk everything. One aircraft, one daring flight, and a secret operation that changed the balance of knowledge in the Cold War.